So from protests to storming the Capitol building, these moments are now a part of America's history.
Yeah, here to give us some perspective on how this unfolded, Dan Cassino, political scientist and historian from Fairleigh Dickinson University. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning.
I'm just trying to process this, as much of our viewers are, trying to figure out how in the world this happened in 2021. As we ushered in a new year, we imagine it being better, but then we saw what played out yesterday. Give us some perspective, because from what we understand, we have not seen the Capitol building being stormed since the British invaded back in 1814 during the War of 1812.
Yeah, this is unprecedented in American history, where we actually have rioters break into the Capitol building. But from a historical perspective, this does show that we are in a new era. You know, in the past, we've always been able to say, all right, well, protest movements, we've had those before. We've had contested elections before in 1876 and 1884, even in 1960. So we've had contested elections, we've had protest movements. So what makes this different is the fact that one of the major parties embraced the conspiracy theories that were underlying that protest movement. And because the leadership of a party embraced it, we saw the members of that party have been emboldened. They believe deeply that the election was stolen from them. They believe what the president's telling them, that this was a coup on the other side, that Democrats illegally somehow stole the election from them. And if you really believe that, you're going to be angry about it.
And when you look, these images that we're showing on the screen, this is what will be in the history books generations from now. Images I never thought we would see in history books because of this. But I want to talk about some of the history about the actual process of the certification of the election. It did resume last night. The results were certified. Historically, has there ever been some kind of objection to an election? And did it play out like we saw last night?
Well, of course, it did not play out like we saw last night, but we have had objections to elections in the past. In fact, the law that the members of Congress were working under, the Electoral Count Act, was put in place after a contested election in 1876, where Congress actually rejected the votes from a number of states, then had a commission, and the commission voted on an entirely partisan basis to award that election to the Republican, even though he had initially lost in the Electoral College. We have had objections, of course, in more recently than that, too. We had an objection in 2004, where we had Democrats who objected in one investigation what happened in Ohio in 2004, the state that gave President George Bush his second term. And there were objections, though they were not sustained, in 2016 as well. So we've had objections, but this process of counting electoral college votes has never actually been contentious before. Every time we've had objections in the past, there was an objection, Congress moved to debate it, and then we were done with it. We certainly never had anything like we saw yesterday.
Nothing. Yeah, clearly. And we were all shocked and surprised by it. But let's talk about what a lot of people are floating around now, and that's the 25th Amendment. What can that do? Help us understand the legal and historical perspective here, if that is invoked.
So the 25th Amendment was essentially put in place to prevent a situation like we had with President Wilson. President Wilson had a stroke while he was in office. In the last couple of years he was in office, was in the White House bedroom and simply never left, never communicated, never talked to anybody, no one who was actually running the country. And so as a result, the system we have in place says the president is incapable. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet can certify that he is incapable, and then he is removed from power, at least temporarily. So that's what we're looking at with the 25th Amendment. Now, I do think that it's unlikely that we're going to have President Trump removed by the 25th Amendment for a couple of reasons. First off, the 25th Amendment was really not made for mental incapacity. It was made for physical incapacity. Because if the president believes that he is not actually incapable, he can just send a letter to Congress saying, no, I'm good. And at that point, he gets the power back unless Congress votes to sustain his removal from office. So it's really unlikely. And I think also the president's statement very early this morning saying that he had, in fact, lost the election, there will be early transition of power, that probably took some of the wind out of the sails of people saying, we need to get rid of this guy now.
Let's talk about that statement briefly, because that statement did come out this morning. Let's throw it up on the screen for you right now, where the president did say, even though I totally disagree with the outcome of the election and their facts bear me out, nevertheless, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. So you're saying that took the wind out of the sails of the movement to enact the 25th Amendment with 13 days left in his presidency. But just historically speaking, when you look back, was there ever a presidency that didn't have a smooth transition, or that was problematic along the way?
No, this is actually a hallmark of American democracy. One of the things we've prided ourselves on up until this point, that we've always had the loser acknowledge the victor. The closest we've gotten is a couple presidents who didn't show up for the inauguration. And even that hasn't happened in a couple hundred years.
Well, that really shows where we are in history right now. Thank you, Dan Cassino. We do appreciate your insight as always. Thanks for joining us on what has been really a historic moment.
Yeah.
My pleasure.